Hey, this is Zach Log the Great, and I am joined tonight by Harry Seldon.
Salutations.
Who has previously joined us to discuss two of the Harry Dresden books. And tonight we are getting together. Tonight we are getting together to talk about The Hammer of Witches. I was struggling on the title there for a moment. The Hammer of Witches.
Book 2 in the Covenant Chronicles.
Book 2 of the Covenant Chronicles by Kai Wai Cheah, who also I think goes by Benjamin Cheah sometimes, and I don't know. Anyway, but and I'm probably horribly mispronouncing the name, and oh well. He is free to contact me and object if he wishes to my pronunciation of his name. Before we really get rolling, 2 orders of business. First, if you like my work, if you'd like to support what I do, you can support me on subscribestar.com. That's subscribestar.com/Zachlog-the-great. And I also wanted to say thank you to some of my Subscribestar supporters, and that includes DeadMessenger, Edward K, and Ann H. Thank you for your support and sticking with me. And having said that, this is usually the point where one of us would read a poem, but we're not reading an entire novel tonight. So, yes, this is the book is The Hammer of Witches by Kai Wai Cheah, and it's for anyone not familiar. Okay, first of all, this is not. There's going to be spoilers throughout this discussion. If you haven't read this yet, I would recommend doing so first and then coming back, because we're going to be talking about plot points the whole way through the book.
And if you haven't seen Zach Log's discussion of Book 1, it'll be in the link below, hopefully.
Yes, yes. I had a discussion with a different friend of Book 1, which is No Gods, Only Diamonds. And what else? Okay, so seems smart to give a brief, kind of plot overview of these 2 books. It is, if you understand the reference, it is just a little bit like Shadowrun. It's relatively near future science fiction technology with a heavy dose of magic mixed in, and the main character is a part of it's also an alternate history, and so the main character is part of the not United States of an intelligence program of the not United States, and the not United States is in a strange asymmetrical war with factions of not Islam. And let me see. In this book, a contact he had previously made and worked with in the first book is part of a nationalist vigilante group called Hexenhammer that is working to oppose basically, again, not Islamic terror and other organized crime and things throughout Pantopia, which is not Europe.
This brings an interesting question. Is the geography precisely the same? Because I haven't noticed any contradictions, but I also have not read it in enough detail to say for sure.
Let's see. I don't know. I mean, in my head, I pretty much imposed our world map on this, but I was never paying enough attention to see whether everything lined up that way. And I guess, let's see. I mean, what you would look at is, what places share borders,
Right.
what travel time between place X and place Y is.
But
And I was never
travel time's weird here because of the everything's done by airship and not plane.
right.
So, hmm.
But anyway, so in this book, there is a false flag terror attack on a refugee camp, and the Hexenhammer, which is the this nationalist vigilante group, is framed for this attack, and so the main character and his new ally have to set out to basically vindicate her group and find out who actually did this. And that's a 90-second or a couple minute overview of the plot of this book. I hope I gave a rough idea of what we're talking about. So anything big I missed that would get people
I think something I mentioned before the recording started. This book, Jonathan Swift is frequently described as writing heavy satire, and it's difficult reading it from a present day perspective. We're not immersed in the issues of 17th century England like Jonathan Swift was. And so a lot of the references sort of get lost on us. We can see that he's referring to something, but it's not obvious what it is. This, I would say, is a decent, less comedic than Jonathan Swift generally was, but this is a decent modern day analog of that. It's satire not in the sense that it's satirizing a genre, but it's satirizing a world. It's taking real things and fictionalizing them just enough that he can write about them in a way that he couldn't do literally. Maybe an analogy would be Perseus with a mirror looking at Medusa, but not being able to look at Medusa straight on. If that interests you, I would recommend this series.
Yeah, it's and like I said, this is there's going to be spoilers throughout, so this is going to be the first one. One of the characters got involved in Hexenhammer, actually started Hexenhammer, basically because she survived something like the Charlie Hebdo the attack on Charlie Hebdo for publishing anti-Islam material, and again, like that reference is fairly obvious to us today, but 50 or 100 years from now, it's just going to be kind of part of her background, and like it's not, to most people, it wouldn't be a very clear reference to anything. Which it's kind of interesting, an interesting question, because like trying to see what is trying to understand, like look around at what's going on today and what are the big issues today, and what is something that is passing and is just a thing right now, and what is an issue, what is it, something that is an enduring part of human experience. It's really hard for us to say. It's hard for us to kind of step out of our own world and look at things with that kind of distance, and it's kind of interesting to try to take that kind of perspective.
Yeah, and I would say to us, it probably doesn't matter. Time will eventually filter out books that really were ephemeral, books that really were of the moment. And I say this because G.K. Chesterton, one of his books, I think it was Alarms and Discursions, he specifically started it out by saying that a lot of this is very much present day stuff, and it'll be outdated roughly 5 minutes before it hits the printing press. But yet, a lot of it's still in. Granted, there are obviously references to places and people that I've never heard of, but a lot of it is still enduring, even despite his certainty that it wouldn't be. So, to an extent, it doesn't matter. If you write about something that's true, you're going to hit on something that's permanent.
Well, it is kind of interesting. Also, like on my YouTube channel, I also do kind of commentary opinion. I occasionally will talk about some relatively current news story, but more commonly, I try to just talk about the issues, the questions, the kind of philosophical or um, the philosophical kind of elements that like shape our thinking, because the thing about the news is it's very interesting right now, but 2 weeks from now it's going to be forgotten, and if you all you do is talk about that kind of thing, what you're saying doesn't really have any endurance, doesn't really have any staying power.
Mm-hmm.
Whether anything I say does have staying power is yet to be determined.
We can't assume the what was it? Assume the contrapositive. I think that's the phrase from Logic.
That sounds.
If you negate something, you can't assume the opposite.
But anyway, so what are just kind of broad impressions? What do you think of this book, Hex and Hammer, and I guess the two of them together?
I found the book fairly interesting. I think it did more world building than the first book. Insofar as the first book, everything that it did, it was paid off in that book. It introduced the Unmaker, and we meet the Unmaker. It introduced the Void, and then we see the Void. Introduced Ethereum and Lithium, and then he uses both. This, I think, introduced a lot more elements that didn't pay off immediately, that are setting up things down the line.
Well, I've never talked to this author. I'm not in his head. So this is, more or less just a guess. But I would guess part of that is if the first one did well enough that he went on to, write and publish the second one, then he has a little more confidence that he can build out from here. Whereas the first one, it's like, let's see if this flies at all.
Right.
And so you want to just make that, focus on making that one work.
Yeah, this isn't really a criticism, but it is something that I noticed. There's a lot here that we're probably going to not mention, that looking back on it, we should have meant. Once we read book 3, book 4, we'll look back and say, we should have mentioned that. That was an obvious setup in retrospect.
Have you read much by Brandon Sanderson?
I have not. I have heard it. I know what you're referring to, though. The Wheel of Time series, I'm guessing.
Actually, no. I haven't read his finishing the Wheel of Time. But no, there's the first thing of his I read was Mistborn, which is a trilogy, and he actually has the most amazingly he sets up things in book 1 that when they finally show up in book 3, like it's just slap you over the head. Oh, this was so obvious, but I didn't notice it. And it was, well, okay. Give me a second. He tells you something almost at the very beginning of book 1, and he refers to it occasionally throughout the whole trilogy. By the time you get to book 3, it's just kind of a bit of characterization. It's a little bit of detail about this person, and you're not really thinking about it that much. Then, at the beginning of book 3, he tells you this other piece of information that if he had told you those two things at the same time, you would have said, oh, this is this, and you would have immediately kind of put them together. But like I said, by that point you're like, oh, that's just this thing about this character. And then at the end of book 3, he puts those together, and it is just an absolutely stunning moment where it's like, that's been there the whole time. How did I? Oh my god! It's amazingly well done.
There's this example that's not a spoiler, just to kind of make it more concrete, from the Laundry Files, which is much like this in the sense that it's very much an urban fantasy setting. Think H.P. Lovecraft meets Dilbert. And there are these continual jokes throughout the whole series about paperclip audits, because upper management is just, they're absolutely anal about auditing everything. And we also know roughly how the magic works in this world, namely principle of contagion. And these are set up and these are referenced multiple times, but never in the same chapter, until eventually we find out why paperclip audits are so important. If you clip papers together, then the information from one can get to the information to the other because of the principle of contagion, and that's a potentially enormous security leak. And things like that, I love setups like that. I hope that how do you pronounce his last name? Chai?
Cheah. I'm just guessing
Cheah?
you could be
okay.
right.
Cheah, I'll go with that. I'm hoping Cheah is doing that. But we'll see.
One thing that's kind of interesting to me, like looking at this as a developing series, the second book, Hammer of Witches, is the plot and the characters of the second book are a lot more. There's a lot more complexity than the first one.
Yes.
Because the first one, it's more or less a, hunt down the bad guy, a pretty direct hunt down the bad guy kind of thing. And they've got to figure out who this is and get to him and put a stop to him, and they do. Otherwise, this book wouldn't be here. But then in this one, like I said, Hex and Hammer is framed for this, and they've got to. Excuse me, sorry. And they've got to. They're dealing with two problems at the same time. They've got to evade capture by the police and like the security forces, because they are now listed. They are now considered a terrorist group, and they've also got to figure out who is the traitor within their group, and figure out who this is and how to bring them down and vindicate the group. There's a lot more. Like I said, it's a lot more complex. It's a lot more interesting in terms of the development of the story at that level.
Yeah, he had to really think through. In the first book, we didn't really see firsthand that Hexenhammer was more than just Eve. And in fact, if I recall correctly, Luke and Pete suspected for a bit that it really was just Eve, and that she was sort of faking she was pretending to have an organization, in order to seem bigger, a force multiplier effectively. But here we see that there is an organization, and we get details as to exactly how it works. How do you maintain a decentralized organization, and how don't you maintain one? Where are the weak points? Because decentralization is not a magic bullet. I found that more interesting. We got some equivalent scenes in book one, the inside of the agency in not the U.S. but Hesperia. In the Hesperian agency, we see some of that. We see some intrigue. O'Connor, who is our hero's boss in the agency, we get hints that his bosses are corrupt, but that he's not. But we don't really see. It's just a generic government agency, a generic straight up the chain hierarchy. This is much more intricate.
Yeah, and let's see. And also, like the Luke and Pete and their friends, they work for the program.
The program, not the agency. You're right.
Yeah, and which is it's kind of like a not officially recognized intelligence operation, and but I mean it does work. They are basically employed by the not U.S. government, and it's a theirs is a up and down command structure, whereas Hex and Hammer is in structure, and this is part of why part of the problem they experience in structure. It is much more like it would be much more probably like Al Qaeda or ISIS, in that it's a it's a connected, it's a group of people working together ideologically, but there's not this this clear hierarchy, and there's not any one person giving orders, which has some advantages. I am, by the way, I would like to mention I am the leader of Gamergate, and has some advantages.
And I'm Spartacus, but I don't want to brag.
It has some advantages and has some disadvantages as well, and so it's there's the whole aspect of the book, like of both of these books, the intelligence work, and how spies would go about their getting information, making contacts, and trying to manage everything. That is one of the very interesting parts of these books. I have no idea. I don't know. I have no idea how accurate any of it is, but it's at least plausible, if that makes sense.
It's the same feeling that I get reading. Oh, I shouldn't have started the sentence because I can't remember his name now. He writes a lot of military sci-fi. John Ringo.
Oh, okay. I haven't read anything of his yet.
It's the same feeling I get reading John Ringo, in that I am not in the military. I don't know if it's accurate, but it's written with confidence.
Well, and also it seems like there's some people who have done where is it? I don't know if I have it, if I may have gotten rid of it. I had a copy of John Scalzi's Red Shirts, and it's like, I don't actually buy that these people are part of a military command. It doesn't seem how these people would actually act. Yeah. So what was I don't know if you're all familiar with this. There's a book. Actually, wait. Let me see if I can find my copy. Wave that around. It's here somewhere. There's a book by Orson Scott Card. There it is. And it's how to write science fiction and fantasy. By Orson
I've read
Scott
it.
Card. Right. And okay, so that makes this more convenient. There's a part of that he talks about in there. It's like, what is the focus of the story you're trying to tell? And it's obviously intended for people who are trying to create these. It's also a useful analytical tool for what is going on in this story. He calls it the MICE quotient, which is Milieu, idea, character, event. And basically, like I said, it's what is the focus of this story? What is the primary thing the reader is getting out of it? And Milieu would be, here's this cool world. Look at this cool world. We're more or less on a ride through this, and look around, see all the cool things going on. I'm trying to think of. There's idea, which is what some intellectual problem is presented to the main character, and he has to figure this out. Murder stories would be idea stories. Isaac Asimov's robot short stories would be idea stories. There's character, which basically something upsets the life of something, intrudes on the life or the this particular person, and the story is basically about their interior development, their own reaction to this, which is basically all quote unquote literary fiction today, which is terrible label for that, but that's another thing. And I consider that basically just a kind of a genre. Anything produced calling itself literature. Well, no, we haven't had time yet. We haven't had time yet to figure that out. But and then there's event, which is, something happens, something changes, something happens, and the characters have to react to it, and how it changes the world. I can definitely see this one as a Milou story, partly. Interesting world. How do all these things work? What's going on? Look at this. Look at that. And if Milou and event is where I would put this one. Not you just on character. And yeah, it's technically it's a mystery, but I don't think it's that would be the real focus of these ones.
The mystery is just part of the environment. It's a given, and we're along for the ride. We're not given. It's not like a Sherlock Holmes story or a Father Brown mystery. We're not given the clues. We don't know the culprit ahead of time. We're just along for the ride. We're watching them figure it out, but we couldn't have figured it out ourselves.
Right. There's not enough, like, when they finally show you who it is, it's not like, oh, I should have known. It's just like, okay, well, that's because
exactly,
there's not really information ahead of time that would tell you that. But I think another interesting contrast between this and the first book, in the first one, the bad guy they're chasing, Sheik, whatever his name is, Fasal. That sounds right. Anyway, yes. But the Sheik, he is like almost cartoonishly a bad guy. He is he is directing Dar Wahal. Fudge.
He's directing a group that is definitely not ISIS.
Yes. He's planning and funding not Islamic terror, and he is extremely wealthy sadist, among other things, that maintains a harem of highly paid prostitutes, basically.
I was genuinely surprised that he didn't, when he got rid of one, that he didn't kill her, that he left her with money, with her possessions in a major port, as the contract specified. He was so cartoonishly evil in every other facet that not killing somebody should be the default, but here it stood out.
I hadn't considered that, but yes, it would have been. I don't know, but there's so like that's the villain of the first one. In this one, and so like not only are there these obviously morally corrupt elements of him, but he also is leading this utterly foreign ideology. And then in this book, the who ultimately turns out to be the bad guy, he's part of a shadowy organization. It's not it's not ISIS. They're globalists. Their goal is basically the erasure of a big part of their goal is the erasure of national identity and the establishment of basically one world government, which is much more similar to people who are for instance holding actual political office in the United States. And he's not like this super wealthy insulated billionaire sadist.
He's a true believer.
Well, and he's also a probably well-paid bureaucrat. He also has a family, and he has a little girl, and it's like it gives you a very different feel. Like, when he, spoiler everyone, when he gets killed at the end, it's like, well, you're kind of glad he's dead, but he does have a wife and kid, and it's not really their fault.
Right, and he was given motivation that did make sense. In the background, before book one, I believe it's something like 35 years ago by the time book one starts, there was World War III. And World War III took place between Hesperia and a country that was not the Soviet Union. And it was not just the equivalent of a nuclear war, it was an actual nuclear war plus a war involving summoning, involving magic. Daemons fought, and the nuclear weapons involved were actually the smaller part of the conflict because nobody developed this nuclear super weapons. Everybody was too busy working with Ethereum and Lithium. And at any rate, because of that, because World War III is still fresh on everybody's mind, his motivation really is, if we can have one world government, then maybe a single country collapsing isn't going to spark a war that involves the entire world. And so the Sheik didn't really have a motivation that we could tell beyond simply personal pleasure. This guy, Hans Brandt, did.
Yeah, and it's and like I said, the Sheik is it's an analog for Islam, and radical Islam, and this guy, which is to us a very alien ideology, whereas this guy is an analog for globalists, and
much closer to home, you could say.
Yeah, and so it's interesting the change in the adversary between the two books.
And it's something I was wondering when I was reading that. We're going to have to stick with this, realistically speaking, because you can't, I mean, barring aliens, you can't go up further than the globe on a story like this. And so it's hard. We know we haven't seen the last of this organization. We know there have been hints that that they have agents high up in the Hesperian government. We know they have agents throughout Pantopia who were not brought to justice, who are still at large at the end of the book. But it's hard to know what kind of human adversary you could have that's going to be bigger than these guys.
Well, it's another interesting element with these books is, okay, there was the Sheik, there is Hans Brandt, and his group whose name we do not know, but there are also spiritual enemies. There is, behind both of those guys, manipulating them in some way, is the Unmaker in this one, who is not Satan.
What's interesting is that there is apparently a different spirit called Shaitan, who was mentioned in the first book, but we haven't actually heard from him in this book, so it could be a different name for the same character. And that I bring that up because that's a question I'm going to have later. Are certain characters the same character with different names? But continue.
Yeah, and but and so they're also at a much deeper level working against the Unmaker, who Luke happened to have attracted the attention of as an angry, emotionally wounded young man, and apparently left some kind of mark on Luke, that other beings notice from time to time, and it's and so seeing him working through these things is interesting as well. It's actually kind of one thing I think is kind of a neat touch, because it matches what, without explicitly saying it too. It doesn't come out and beat you over the head with this. It's just the way they describe the situation, you realize what's going on. It matches, what kind of the way Christians talk about Satan and devils, and kind of the way Tolkien talked about Sauron and Morgoth, because like a couple of times in the book, what is it? The Unmaker maneuvers them into a place where, basically, Sol Invictus intervenes, and basically shows them how to pull some kind of stunt that will get them out of this. And he's like, "That's really neat. I'm gonna remember that, and I'm gonna use that later."
Yes, it very, very much that vein. Maybe not even Sauron, maybe Morgoth would be a better analogy. Very much in the vein of he can't create, but he can copy extremely well. And he's the most active, as far as we can tell, he's the most active of the spirits. There's some kind of truce up in the higher planes of existence. Most of them have boundaries on how much they interfere. And he is pushing right up against the edge of the boundaries. He will absolutely take some trick of physics. He'll take some technique that one of the other gods shows the main characters, and he will give that to his people, or to people that aren't even directly working for him, but who, by having it, would serve his interests.
Yeah, and it's what is it? And at the end of this book, there's near the end, there's kind of a conference call between Luke and Al-Hakem, the Archangel, and Sol Invictus, the ancient, Roman god, not Apollo. And
interestingly, there's no reference to any other analog to the Roman pantheon that I saw. It seems like ancient Rome here was more or less monotheistic.
Well, I don't know. Because the thing is, the way he talks about himself and the way others talk about him, he is, more. He is like a local
Yes.
thing, a local god of these people, and like when you see that, that tends to go with polytheism usually.
It's an interesting kind of polytheism. He doesn't claim to be the be-all and end-all. He doesn't claim to be the creator of the world. But it seems like, and maybe there is a historical analog. I haven't heard of any polytheistic societies who worship one god but believe in many. But that's what this seems to be building to. It seems that the ancient Romans worshipped him, even though they were aware that he was local. He was theirs, and there were other gods for other people and other regions.
Yeah, and so to get back to where I was, there's this kind of conference call between the three of them, and or conference dream, if you want to say, and Al-Hakem says, like, you showed the Unmaker that this was a thing that could be done. That was a bad move. Like, what we have no idea what the consequences of that are going to be. What is and Solon Vic's like, well, my people are in trouble. I'm saving my people. And Al-Hakem says, yeah, that time compression trick that causes so much trouble. Several centuries ago, I showed one of my followers how to do that, and then the Unmaker copied that and spread that to the people he wanted to have it, and now it's causing enormous problems. And it's kind of interesting. Like it's trying to balance like long-term strategy and short-term tactics, and like
it only works once, I think, is an assumption you can make. Or if you use anything if there's any kind of magic or science that you use, it seems safe to assume that you're not going to be the only one who knows it after you use it once. And that's going to be interesting given that we've seen very, very short range time travel. That's definitely a setup for a future book.
Yeah, and it's also kind of interesting because they give because like the two of them, I think basically in that same conversation, talk about like what the Unmaker's goal is, which is, basically he wants to trick humanity into destroying the world ourselves, because that would be proof that handing it over to us in the first place was a mistake. And it's like that actually kind of makes sense, like even on a like even for a a being on that kind of level, like that kind of motivation.
Yeah, I mean it's petty, but we get an excerpt from something that is not the Bible, in which the creator talks to the proud angel, he was called, and the proud angel basically said, the world you've created is perfect, but you left it in the hands of imperfect creatures. Surely they should be ruled by higher beings like myself. And the creator disagreed, and the proud angel said, and the creator eventually said, "Okay, well, you're disagreeing with me, therefore you're imperfect. I'm going to expel you from heaven." And the proud angel says, "Okay, well, grant me reprieve, just a short reprieve until the universe ends. I'll go among the children of men, and by their own hands, I'll make the world, and that will prove that I'm right, and that will prove that I'm perfect, because if I'm not wrong, then I am perfect." And the creator said, "Okay, fine, go for it."
Yeah, it's let's see. So what was it's also okay, so in terms of large scale, there's the Unmaker. They also, in this particular book, they also are facing the Hecaton Kyres.
The
Don't have the word in front of
the
me.
100-handed ones.
Yeah, the who at first they basically only know as the Giants.
Yes.
There are these demons that are summoned and embodied and sent out to do this killing. And it's kind of interesting because we actually get to see them. We obviously see them here on Earth, causing enormous destruction. And about halfway through, or a third of the way into the book, we see them at home, in the void. And
What do they do when they're not being summoned?
right, and it's what is it? It's a little bit. It actually reminds me a little bit of the Winter Court, from the Dresden Files, because like for people who don't have the whole picture, from humanity's perspective, they're pretty nasty and they're dangerous. But about in is it which book is it?
Book 12, I think.
Is
Where
it
he
Cold
first,
Days or is it Ghost Story?
I'm pretty sure it's Cold Days.
Yeah, it's Cold Days. And
And I'm reluctant to. I know what you're talking about. I'm reluctant to spoil it further for people who haven't read 12 books into it.
but
But there's a
hey,
larger.
there's a reason they exist, and there's a reason they exist. They are the kind of creatures they are. Like they have a job to do that all of us agree. All of us would say, yeah, please keep that up. And they can only do that job being the kind of creatures that are in other ways dangerous and untrustworthy to interact with.
In this case, it seems that something like the fall of the Titans happened in this universe. There's a class of elder gods that are imprisoned who keep trying to break out. And they actually have to, one of the reasons why they're not perhaps as upset as we would be when they're dragged out of their home domain into the earth. They need to be constantly on their toes. They need to constantly be getting new weapons because the Titans, even in their pit, are always devising ways of escaping. And it's not stated what would happen if the Titans did get out of the pit, but probably not something good.
Yeah, and it is part of the general theme of these books, which is theomachy. A war between the gods is coming, and that was told to Luke in book 1, and so is the escape of the Titans and their and the trouble they cause, is that going to be part of it, or is that basically part of the setting? And it's, yes, we shall see where that one goes, if anywhere. Let's see.
Something I noticed just on the topic of the Giants. So the very first time we see them, they are committing a terrorist attack that Hexenhammer is framed for, and that actually gets the ball rolling. And it's noted that they're using machine guns, but it's noted that they're firing machine guns with one hand and still hitting accurately. And at first, I kind of just wrote that off as an odd bit of the setting. But when our main characters see the footage, that's something they immediately notice. No, you can't fire a machine gun with one hand, let alone hit every shot. That human beings don't do that, and I liked that. It was a bit of realism that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, and it's because basically, like, those guns are designed to be set up on tripods and to be and to be used as part of a stable setup. They're not something that someone's going to be walking around with and firing with. And it's like, there's not a lot of recoil. There's just absolutely stunning accuracy. These aren't humans. I don't know what they are. I don't know what they are, but these are not humans, and it's what was? Let's see. Did you want to take a little time and go through the different main characters?
I think that makes sense.
Okay, so there's Luke Landon, who is the main character. He is a part of this intelligence program for the not U.S. He is the survivor of basically their world's September 11th.
The New Haven World Fair terrorist attack, I believe it was.
Where
Connecticut instead of New York.
Where he saw his girlfriend get incinerated, like, a couple of feet from him. And in response to that, he in anger and grief, he eventually made contact with the Unmaker, and the Unmaker offered him a chance for revenge, and he's like, yeah, let's do that. And that's kind of been following him around ever since. Anything?
So, well, there is something else important about that part of his backstory. the Fosterian Church, which is the closest equivalent in this universe to Christianity, they have sanctuaries that protect against supernatural incursions, and these demonstrably work against low-level incursions. The Ethereum, which is one of the two magic elements in the setting, is something that is built into every altar, effectively. They're called palings. And he, of course, fled to the closest church when the terrorist attack started, like everybody else did. And he watched as the summoned daemons, they were so strong they could break through the paling and kill everybody inside. And that he was a devout Fosterian before the attack, but afterwards he couldn't believe anymore. He couldn't believe that the creator wouldn't defend his own churches. And that's something that directly comes up later on in the book. We'll probably get to it later on, so I'll leave it for that. But
one thing about him, he actually kind of reminds me, and we're in book 2, so we'll see if this continues. He reminds me a little bit of Harry Dresden, and also of the main character. Where is it? Yeah, there it is. Of the Night Watch series by Sergei Lukyanenko. I don't know if you've read those or seen those.
I have not, no.
Yeah, he's a Russian fantasy author, and both of those across the series, they start out with magical talent, but at a relatively low level, a relatively normal level, and as the series goes on, they slowly accumulate more and more power, until eventually they're
they're nigh on forces of nature, if
right.
Dresden's any indication.
Yeah, and so there's Luke, and at the beginning of the first one, he's a scion. He has these powers that the great majority of humanity doesn't have. At the same time, that's not an unheard of thing. And then so that's where he starts. Then he's touched by Al Hakim, and he's given more. And then in the second book, he's also touched by Sol Invictus, and given yet another level of power. And like he's it's that same kind of progression, like just slowly adding up. And it's like, okay, so is there someone else he's going to end up working with in book 3 that is going to change things even more?
Well, he only has the 2 arms, so I don't know where other Shagrimas would go.
Eve's.
Oh, that's a good point.
And also, depending on who and what it is, I don't know if they would have to have the exact same kind of system. But
I mean, it's also possible he won't get any more explicit power-ups, because we see here, even by the end of the book, he is not able to fully utilize his current ones. He doesn't know how yet.
Well, there's that part of it, and then there's also, and they touch on this a little bit with Eve, and kind of moving to her character. The kind of things that the two of them have been granted, you have to be careful in using them, because if you overdo it, you can basically burn yourself out and start to kind of accumulate mental damage.
And not just that, you can burn your soul. Apparently, that's not metaphorical, because he checks his soul a couple times during combat to make sure it's still intact. So that's something that's very convenient from a plot point of view. If you need to limit his power, to just have him realize that he's burning too much of his soul and that he can't use his power for a bit.
Right. And so there's Luke and there's Eve, and like I said,
let's move to Eve.
And Luke is basically a soldier working for the government, more or less. Eve basically is is in this on her own, and is doing this basically ideologically, you know from her point of view, defending her people being Europe, um, being Western civilization as a whole. And so um, and they I don't know what term they use, but they are basically in our world it'd be kind of dissident in today's politics, it'd be dissident right. um a couple of years ago it would have been alt right, which seems to have disappeared in terms of self-reference. I don't really know anyone who calls themselves that anymore. um and and like I said, the thing about her is one thing is they're worried that she might be damaging herself that way, using these things too much, because that's pretty much all she has. Like there's not
She doesn't have
a
military training to fall back on, like Luke and Pete do,
and she also
or
doesn't have the
military resources. Yeah.
yeah, and she also doesn't have the resources of a of an actual intelligence operation. um, and there's a little bit of a question of like it's a will they, won't they, Luke and Eve, which the end of book 2 seems to point to a potential romantic relation between the two of them. I'm not entirely confident Cheah is going to be able to write that well.
Yeah,
Not a big character writer.
and he had the third of the main characters, Peter Hansen. Uh, he had Peter ribbing them from time to time throughout the book, and I hate to say it, but every single time it fell completely flat.
Yeah, and so okay, so that's the third of the main characters. And in terms of like the people who were following the entire time, that's basically the three of them. And he actually reminds me a little bit of Samwise Gamgee, or Xander, from Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah, he's not a Scion. He's not a Covenanter. Unlike Luke and Eva, he's just he is just an extremely skilled operative. He's a very good soldier, and it'll be interesting to see how long he can keep up, given how many power-ups Luke has gotten over the past 2 books.
At the same time, though, like when Sol Invictus covenants with Luke. Oh, hey, I just realized an interesting point there. Okay, I'll have to rewind to that in a moment. But when Sol Invictus covenants with Luke, he basically says to Pete, like, "You're part of this. I want you to stick with them and keep an eye on them." Like he's like, even though he doesn't have the capabilities to be put in the same place, in the same position as those two, like the those who are like the gods Al Hakim and Sol Invictus, both say, keep this guy in the loop, keep this guy with you.
He definitely has some kind of role to play that we aren't aware of yet. What was your insight?
Yeah, so the thing I just realized. Okay, one other thing. What's his? Luke is a Covenanter. He has a mark left on him by this spirit that gives him these powers. That's a capital offense in the not United States. But in the first book, he actually, if he was called up on it, he had the plausible defense that he did not willingly enter into this. It was done to him. And if
he does not have that this time.
Right. And if he could sell them on that, if he could persuade them of that, like that might get him off. He'd probably still be in trouble, but he might not, be executed for this. But yeah, with Sol Invictus, he willingly joins in this one, so he no longer has that defense. On the other hand, with Sol Invictus, like if that was discovered, he does have the possible out there that no one apparently no one alive has seen a charagma, a mark of a spirit like this, that glows. And it seems like that might be something useful to say. This is an entirely different kind of thing. It bears some resemblance, but this is not the same thing that people people are executed for. And so,
But when you have to, either one of those might have worked, but when you have to use both of those excuses in tandem, it might be a tad less convincing.
well, but then there's the question: is there some way, like another scion can look at him and see these things if he keeps them hidden? Because, like, if one of them is discovered, but not the other one.
That's true. But if one of them is discovered, they're going to do a incredibly thorough search, I imagine. If it's possible to forcibly unroll a shagrama, how do you pronounce it? Shargma?
I said charagma. Let me look at the spelling and make sure I have something here. There is
Charagma. Okay.
Yeah, does that sound right?
Yeah, Charagma.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the author. I didn't make up this word, so
we're guessing.
Yes, but if it's possible, you were saying.
Yes, I am. I am curious because he does have to explicitly conceal it, and he is worried that the security measures going into what the church at the end, the Hagia Aletheia, the equivalent of the Hagia Sophia, and that was. It was the reverse. It was as if Istanbul was captured and renamed Constantinople afterwards in this universe, which I found fascinating.
Wait, do I have it? Okay, I might be wrong about this. I thought, if I remember the alternate history correctly, it was built as a Western city, as a Greek city, or Byzantine, I guess. It was conquered by Islam, and then it was retaken.
Oh,
it was taken back. I could be wrong.
I thought it was the opposite. I thought it was originally built by the equivalent of Turkey.
No, because it was conquered, and there was the Great Paling,
right.
The big cross, and that was taken and hidden somewhere,
and then it was brought back.
Right.
You're right. Yeah, I think. Okay, so this was. In that case, did the Reconquista happen in? No. Yeah, I think it is just a straightforward case of it was conquered and then conquered back.
Yes, we haven't heard anything about their version of Spain, or not much about their version of Spain. So.
We know that there was an invasion at around the same time period that Al-Hakim inadvertently facilitated by giving away the secret of time compression. But we don't know exactly what the details of that were. I've been assuming basically like reality, except unless noted.
Right.
I don't know how else to approach this.
What was Okay, so let's see. Luke, Eve, Pete. We already talked about Hans Brandt, who through most of the book is known as the Handler. There's we kind of talked about the gods that they deal with at different points. I think the other side character of interest would be O'Connor. Their manager with the program. What are your thoughts about him or his character?
If he's If he's secretly a working for the as yet unnamed globalist agency, I'd be very surprised. Twice in the, but I think it's just within the realm of possibility, which is why I mention it. So he's the mediator between the team and the government. He runs NISA, and he both near the climax of both books, he basically says, "I'm getting direct orders from a higher up not to let you do the thing that you're about to do. I'm getting direct orders not to let the climactic battle of this book happen." And in both cases, he managed to cover it up. He basically said, "Okay, so do it this way, and I'll be able to hide it until after they can't stop you." But and the obvious setup is, oh well, there are globalists high up in the Hesperian government who are telling him to shut this down. But I think it would be more interesting is what will be more interesting is that if he's actually doing this on his own initiative, if he's trying to sabotage them, or if he's trying to help them. If I don't know, but I think there's more to him than we know right now.
See, now the interesting thing with that idea, because my main thing with his character in this is that he's too willing to go along with whatever Luke throws out. Like Luke frequently says, "Hey, I have a different idea. Why don't we do this?" And it always ends up going. And it seems to me like if you have this character, like just in terms of like the way the story is built, there should be more pushback. But if it's kind of like what you're saying, that might actually be part of further plot development. That's an interesting
and this question. Is completely a guess. We'll have to see.
So let's see.
The one deity we haven't talked about. We talked about Al-Hakam al-Dunya, who works for the Source. He's the archangel of the equivalent of Islam, and he was the one who covenanted with Luke in the first book. We talked about Sol Invictus, who was the Roman god. We talked about the Unmaker, who is the devil or close to it. We have not talked about the Creator. So the Creator is the god of the Fosterian Church, which is the equivalent of Christianity. And it's interesting, Sol Invictus does not claim to have created the world. He's just a local god, but the Creator does in fact make that claim. And when Al-Hakam was asked, is the Creator the same as the Source from not Islam, Al-Hakam basically refused to answer either way, just giving a very vague, very nebulous answer. And I found that very interesting because part of the backstory is the Source, the god of Islam, he left. He created the world. He gave it to Al-Hakam, and he said, "Okay, well, let's see what you can do with this." And he's off somewhere, and nobody's seen him. So if in one theology the creator of the world has gone, and the angels are filling in, and in the other theology the creator is having an active presence and is talking because Luke manages to make contact with him briefly near the climax of this book, I'm not sure how that can be resolved without a contradiction, but I'm also not sure how there can be two creators of the world. But it also is possible that there are two creators of the world, both of whom are complete and self-defining, because we know that there are multiple afterlives. And that which afterlife you go to does in fact depend on which religion you believe in. So there is a lot about this theology of this that I do not understand yet. This is polytheism taken to the next level.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing where like you're just hoping he doesn't make a train wreck of it eventually.
Yeah, I'm reminded. Have you ever read the Two Like the Lightning series, the Terra Ignota series?
No.
It's a sci-fi slash religious fiction, much like this. And part of the core premise is that there is the creator of divine providence, the being who we would refer to as God, and that there is another God who was brought into this universe as a human being. He's his own monotheistic God of a different universe which isn't ours. And the conflict between, how do you mediate this? The narrator at one point refers to himself and other human beings as we the alphabet, and saying that the world is a message between these two deities that we're just a part of. And that's the only analogy I can think of for this setup. I can't think of any from actual religions.
Well, I mean, if you look at the basically the real world equivalent, Christian, the ancient Israeli faith, Christianity and Islam, and Christianity incorporated the old Israeli faith and said, by the way, there's this important part you hadn't gotten yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then Islam did kind of that, but not exactly the same, because it said, all those people, yes, those were prophets, but these other people, these Christians and these Jews have been lying and misrepresenting the message, and so it's kind of similar, but not exactly the same kind of revision to the previous story. But that setup kind of makes sense relative to what we know of this world, except that you have direct input from the god from the gods or angels themselves, and so
it doesn't seem to have helped in that sense.
It's not making things a lot clearer.
Well, part of it, but it is believable that it wouldn't make things clearer, because we see what conversations with the gods look like, and the gods love being vague, and they say specifically that we have to be vague, or else we would abrogate your free will. If you knew precisely what was going to happen, or what precisely would be the consequences of an action, then you wouldn't have the free will that we want you to have.
Yeah, and it's I don't know. I've kind of run down at the moment. Were there any let's see. Were there any particular scenes or particular plot points from this book you wanted to talk about?
There were a couple minor ones. It basically minor mistakes that made me think that realize this is a small publisher. This is a small group. One of them. So the main character, scions in this universe, you can measure the strength of a scion with something called the Voigt-Myers test.
Right.
And it was mentioned that Landon has a score in the 90th percentile, and Eve Martell has a score in the 95th percentile. And it specifies percentile every time it talks about it, but it makes it clear that this is a logarithmic scale. 95th percentile is something like 1 in a million. And that tiny little thing, it bugged me. And when they talked to Sol Invictus greeted Luke by saying Salve, as you would expect a Roman god to do. But then it greeted, when Eve and Pete came in, it said Salve to them and not Salvete, even though that would be the plural. And then when they left, he said Salve again and not Valete, which would be goodbye in the plural. And again, tiny little thing, does not affect the plot at all, but it bugged me.
I know no Latin, so yes, this is something that completely missed me. What was let's see.
I found that I also found we have in every book we have multiple viewpoint characters. Luke is always a viewpoint character, but we have others. We had Eve, and in this one we have, as we mentioned before, the giants. And I found their subplot interesting. Not just the subplot where the giants were back in Tartaros, dealing with the imprisoned titans and waiting for the next summoning and so forth, but we see what it's like for the giants to be summoned. What does that look like from the inside? And we see them actively working on outwitting their constraints. They have some constraints placed even on their thoughts, but one of them, Stormbringer, noticed that these constraints are not perfect. When he thought about going out the back door at one point to retreat, the mental kill switch, he felt it activate, or pain switch perhaps. He felt that collar around his mind basically stop him from going out the back door to retreat. When he thought about going out the back door for an ambush, even though he was doing the same action now, it let him do it. And he continued, every single chapter that we see him, he continues experimenting with his constraints, getting around them, until finally we see in the very last chapter, we see his handler show up in Tartaros itself. And now the roles are fully reversed. Previously, he had managed to hurt his handler, quote unquote, by accident. He basically did something without thinking about collateral damage, and in the process hurt his handler and noticed that he wasn't punished for that. And so I thought it was a very neat build-up how every single time he was reversing his constraints until the final chapter where the roles are fully reversed.
Yeah, and seeing them, trying to wiggle around the rules put on them, which is, in all the good stories where someone is foolish enough to call up a devil, to achieve some aim, it's like that, basically, part of what happens there is they are, looking for ways around the rules, and they're going to find a way, to break what you put on them and come get you. And so, yeah, that's, but you're not usually in on the, plotting of that. So that was,
and that's
well.
what I like. I quite like that. And I was reminded of a quote about a guy named Nick Land. But Scott Alexander at one point mentioned Nick Land. Nick Land is in that terrifying border region where he's figured out a number of important principles for summoning arcane demons, but hasn't figured out the most important such principle, which is never do that. That's what I kept thinking of throughout this whole story.
Well, yeah, and it's and what they're doing, what the globalists are doing here is basically, their world's equivalent of developing biological weapons. It's like, do you have any idea of the kind of forces you're toying with here, and if they get loose, what could go wrong? Like, when they're the first time we see them returning to the void, Stormbringer even says this himself. He's like, these fights they're calling us up for, this is entirely beneath us. They're
we can do a lot more than just kill a few hundred people.
They're bringing a nuke to a gunfight. And and that's another, and that sense of the arrogance of these people who are who think they're running the world, much like the arrogance of the people who think they're running our world.
Well, what's scary is that the arrogance is somewhat justified, because they do notice that the constraints they're under, including the mental constraints, are a lot better than the last time they were summoned up to Earth. These people, they're not complete amateurs. They've covered the obvious things, and it's clear that they're continuing to record what's happening, and they're continuing to improve their techniques of summoning and binding.
But at the same time, we see the giants chipping away at these, and like it doesn't happen in this book, but we get the sense that if they keep on making use of them, they're going to find a way around this, and when they do, it's going to be catastrophic.
And we explicitly see that it's not, if you're involved in this sort of thing, then when you go to the afterlife and you meet them, it's not going to be pleasant for you.
Yeah, I created the TV tropes page for both of these books so far, and I need to add the oh crap moment to this one.
Well, there is a trope for this: the problem with fighting death.
Okay, I don't know that one. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, look it up. I believe that covers pretty much this exact thing, where if you fight something that is the incarnation of death, then you're still eventually going to die someday, and that's going to be a problem for you.
What's the other? I think the other interesting, the most interesting scene for me, is when what is it? I forget his name. Eve's friend is sent to the Hagia Aletheia, to the Vatican, basically, or the what would be the equivalent church? Because the Vatican is not the church.
It would be the head of the. What's the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church, or is there one? I know they don't have a.
Well, but no, I was thinking about the building itself.
Yeah.
About the church. St. Peter's Basilica, would that be the church?
Yeah, I think that would. I mean, if we're talking about the Vatican, that would be it.
I'm a terrible Catholic, I guess. I should know. But they're sent to the church of the whole of the Fosterian faith, and he's sent there to blow her up, and probably cause collateral damage, which they would also then blame on Hexenhammer. And when that fails, when basically he warns her and runs as far away as he can from anyone else before he gets blown up, they send in the giants to get her, and then there's this fight in the church, in the Hagia Aletheia, and as we've referred to a few times already, there's a moment where both Luke and Eve are on their last legs. They're run down, and he's like, I got nothing else, may as well try this. And he goes up to the great paling, the symbol and the spirit and a genuine source of power in the church, and he touches it, and he basically says, I don't know if anyone's listening, but if you're there, I could use some help. And he says, well, okay, well, who shall we send to defend these people? And
he said, "Here I am, send me," which paralleled a couple scenes that I can think of from the Bible, and I don't think that's a coincidence.
It's there's a particular one. I think that's the most. Well, I can't remember. It's one of the prophets, but I can't remember who.
Are you thinking of? Oh, no, I can't remember it either. But he's called.
Okay, Isaiah. It's Isaiah 6:8. Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, Here am I, send me.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it's and that's an interesting moment, both for the character, because
he explicitly lost his faith in in this god in particular, back at New Haven, and now he's seeing. It's clear that faith does not equal. Faith and belief are not exactly the same in our world. You can very much believe that something exists without worshiping it. And that distinction is important. He now believes that the creator exists. He didn't believe that before. But he's still not he's still not worshiping him.
Well, and it's yeah, and so like for the character it's an interesting moment, and then also for the future development of the books, it's like, okay, so again, what's coming in book 3 is a big question here.
A minor character who I liked was Frank the Hacker, and his various unnamed other hackers in Hexenhammer. They were basically escorting those hackers around from place to place, partly to keep them alive from the purge that was going on, but also as a way to help. And I've known enough people in IT to know that that's at least partially accurate. Just the way they would immediately set up the kind of chaos that happens when you have that many computers in that small space. Just little details, but I liked it. It felt very real to me.
Well, and it's also the interesting because it's another layer of the difference between Luke and his people and Eve and her people, and it's like very structured, very hierarchical, very much chain of command on one side and military discipline, and then on the other side it's like, well, do I have to watch this camera? It's like, yes, if you want to stay alive, yes, what you're gonna do. And that's what most of us who have never been in any kind of military organization, that's how most of us probably would act when dropped into that kind of situation.
Yeah,
and so that's an
these are very much people who they're like the hacker known as 4chan. They're very good within their own domain. It's clear that they have the capabilities because they do hack. They manage to hack Interpol, and it's not just generic. We've disencrypted their firewall with a kilobyte handshake or something. They specifically talk about how we looked at the entire roster for this particular office, and we found one person who had an insecure phone who we got to Bluetooth sync up with a supposedly secure system. Like he showed his work basically, and they got in.
Yeah, it's one thing I've heard people who have actual knowledge of real world hacking talk about is that there's a lot more of manipulation of people than most of us tend to think, and they did involve that. Social engineering is a term that is used for that.
But the contrast between them, we have seen. We know that there are hackers working for NISA as well, but when Luke needs something, when he needs something traced, or an email sent, he just sends the request to the agency, and it gets handled with behind the scenes professionally, and he gets the results a few hours later. And like you were saying, it's just another layer of contrast between Hexenhammer and NISA.
Well, we are at an hour and a half. I feel like I've covered most of the main points I wanted to talk about with this one.
Yeah, a lot of stuff we're not going to know until later. We're not going to know what was important that we missed.
So,
well, there is one thing. A character we didn't mention is Eve's father, who the last name of Martell probably is not a coincidence. everybody who knows him thinks that he's involved with Hexenhammer. Eve is pretty sure, no, I founded Hexenhammer myself. I covenanted with a god to do it. My dad was not involved. I would know. But that it does seem to indicate that her dad is going to come into the picture at some point. And I'm not really sure. I don't think he would reuse the traitor thing twice in this context. But I'm not sure what context her dad could be active, but not in Hexenhammer. We haven't seen any hints of any similar organizations in Pantopia.
Yeah, that will be something interesting as well. One minor point, which a couple of years ago, my wife decided to start tracing her family tree. She was just kind of curious about this, and she was able to hook up with established resources, and she was able to go back quite a ways, and she eventually started finding names with of royalty and stuff, and back basically again, if what she's found is accurate, she is a descendant of Charlemagne. So that's kind of interesting. Although
you and Michael Carpenter from Dresden Files are actually distant relations then.
Well, now the other thing with that, apparently, do you know the thing about Genghis Khan?
About how 1 in 10 people apparently are descended.
Yeah, I don't know the exact number, but he's the male ancestor of an enormous part of a large part of Asia, of East Asia. Apparently, Charlemagne is something like that for Europe. Not quite as pronounced, but large percentages of Europeans alive today can trace a line back to him.
Look at it this way, Zachlog. There will come a point at which you're either the ancestor of all human beings or none of them. So you just have to wait, and that'll be you.
Okay. Let's see. So yeah. I think I covered everything I wanted to have here. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on with this book?
No, I think the Hackers was the last point on my list.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to book 3.
Yeah. Thank you for joining me. And yeah, what is I should know this, especially since I put this together. What is the title of book 3?
That's an excellent question. Prince of Shadows.
Okay. So, yes. So book 1, No Gods, Only Diamonds. Book 2, The Hammer of Witches. Book 3, The Prince of Shadows. I am definitely interested in where this series is going. It's not. I won't say they're perfect. I won't say they're the best books. They're the best science fiction I've ever read. It is fun. It is entertaining. It is a good story, and I would definitely recommend these. And having said that, thank you for joining me, and
thank you for having me.
Good night. And where's